We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. As always, you can follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. You can shoot us an email at radio@thefederalist.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Christopher Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Emily. So you're hosting?
Yeah, we didn't talk that through. So Chris and I actually just got back from a little bit of an adventure. We walked the entire perimeter of the fencing that surrounds the Capitol building. I mean, it's not really just the Capitol building. It's the entire campus, essentially.
It's everything.
Right.
It goes right through my street, Independence Avenue, where I live. It goes right through Pennsylvania Avenue, Constitution.
You just doxed yourself.
Maryland. Independence is long, and I'm armed. It cuts the main arteries of the city basically in half, at least the east to west arteries of the city in half. There are businesses there. There's a wonderful restaurant that used to be, it's a fancy restaurant that was all the senators and everyone would go to. That used to be a frequent spot. You walk right from the Capitol to it, and now it's just closed because it's surrounded by fencing. There are National Guardsmen everywhere. I mean, when you walk out of Union Station, which is designed so beautifully, so grand, if you've never been there, you should go check it out sometime when you're in D.C. It was the entrance to Washington, and you walk out in between the massive columns, and you see the Capitol. But instead now, you see 3 homeless tents and a military gate, a reinforced fencing with Constantine razor wire around it, a military truck, and soldiers were armed with weapons. And we're about half a mile.
A lot of soldiers.
From the Federalists. We're about a half mile from the Capitol. Mm-hmm. When this happens, it's unreal. And at least, thank goodness for the soldiers, the weather is finally starting to warm up, because last weekend, those poor men and women were out there in freezing ice and sleet, and everything was covered in ice in Washington, D.C., all for Nancy Pelosi's panic pornography for the nation.
Yeah, I want to get into that because I think it's a good example of, I actually think it's a good illustration of the Democratic Party's priorities. I think you can see a lot of that in what they're doing just with the Capitol fencing. I would add to Chris's sort of report of what we saw, and obviously we live here and see it every day, but when we actually went out there and walked the perimeter, it was crazy how much of the Capitol is blocked off. And the saddest thing that I saw, I mean, there are a couple really depressing things, but the saddest thing is, sure, we live here and we care about it locally, but this is America's capital city. And we saw some tourists, from some European tourists.
Oh my gosh! How embarrassing is that?
Right, and
that was embarrassing.
It's. I mean, this is the sort of the jewel of democracy historically. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what our monuments are a testament to.
It looks like the Berlin Wall.
There's literally
no guard towers.
Razor wire.
There's the razor wire, and it's. I mean, these Germans have got to be like, wow, look at this. And you know what? And I guarantee you the messaging here is working. There was also a German television crew there taking photographs. I don't know, I guess the Germans were out today. It's school vacation or something. But if you come to the country and you see this place treated like the Baghdad embassy in the Green Zone, then you say, wow, this is insane. America's on the cusp of race war. The evil, Trump supporters must really mean it. Look how their own government has to hide from them. If there was a fascist uprising or something, or a communist uprising in Germany, and I went to go visit, and I saw all the government buildings wrapped off and troops everywhere, I would think, wow, this is serious. And it would take me probably living there to realize this is all fake. This is all theater. It's been over 7 weeks. I mean, Washington, D.C. has been going through riots now for 5 years, not even counting the 60s. The modern riots in Washington, D.C. On Inauguration Day, the day Trump was inaugurated, I had to run with my date through the streets. After we were done reporting and finished our day jobs going out that night, we were easily targeted because we were dressed up to go out and meet people at some of the celebrations, balls around town. You're chased by Antifa. She had to take off her heels, and we had to run. There was no wire done back then. The White House has been attacked repeatedly with guillotines put up, guests coming in from the RNC, from the White House officials' guests attacked, senators running through the streets with their wives while police are pushed over trying to defend them, courthouses besieged. entire blocks of downtown given away to terrorist groups like Black Lives Matter.
That is 100% true. Yes.
Hotels shut down, and there's none of this. But then there's these fools went out for this one riot on January 6th, and now we're going to be an occupied city for 2 months? Or how long do you think this lasts?
I think it'll go longer. And that's the thing that really grinds my gears.
Grinds my gears.
But really grinds
Airing
my
of
gears.
grievances.
Don't give me a flashback to that. But what really is upsetting to me is that there are people in the DC government, or there's a push in the DC government to investigate how the Capitol Police treated the January 6th rioters differently from the rioters over the course of the summer. And I literally watched an ABC News report on what happened on January 6th, and they made this very explicit comparison between that and what happened when Donald Trump walked across Lafayette Square, and there were chemical irritants used to disperse the crowd so that he could get the photo op there. But they compared it to that and said, this is
that was a show of force and law and order against the mob.
But here's what makes me really mad.
It was a photo op, but it was a good show of force, just like when Mike Pence went to the border or this and that.
But what makes me really mad about it is that they went through all of that without showing that just beforehand they were trying to actually topple a statue right outside the White House, an angry mob, and they don't mention that. And so these comparisons that they're making in the sort of in an effort, and this is, by the way, is from ABC. Like a supposedly premier news organization, they're just completely melting facts to fit these molds, these like sort of critical race molds, and they're silly and they're just stupid and infuriating. And we were both there on January 6th and completely disgusted by it. But they're like the rioters downtown this summer. The breadth of the damage was
still
stunning.
Banging on their bongos in Black Lives Matter Plaza with Antifa everywhere, like smoking pot and playing guitar, and just like it's a campsite. It's like a festival down there, except for the really nice hotels and the restaurants and the things that people have worked their entire lives, even just to have a career at. Those are basically shut down. And
they were shut down by rioters, not necessarily COVID. I mean, obviously they were struggling because of COVID, but there's a ton of businesses down there that like actually had to, like there was we're getting too much into the business probably, but it really counts. But on the other hand, what I would add to that is like the property damage that happened in Washington, D.C. over the summer. There is no comparison. I mean, it's just to willfully ignore that.
And across the entire country, it just shows you that they don't care about the executive branch. They don't care about the legislative branch, both of which have been attacked by riots. They only care about themselves. And they also, we noticed today, and we've noticed for the last couple of weeks, they don't have any fencing around the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee, which, by the way, were the two places that pipe bombs were placed at on January 6th by likely, there's no suspect yet, but he does not look like the Trump rioters, if you know what I mean. He looks like he's more of the Antifa type, much younger than a lot of the Trump rioters were. But they haven't found him yet. Those places aren't protected. They weren't protected back then. But you're looking at all this theater, and you're wondering, where does it end? Do you actually think that these fences are going to come down? How far can they push this? We've seen it's been a kind of a crazy year. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of COVID, where it turns out you can take away most Americans' liberties without them reacting to it. How far can they push all this?
That's actually really, the way that you just framed it is kind of frightening.
It's really depressing.
Because I actually think, there were some conservatives who were sort of celebrating the broader pushback against the emergency powers and the overly invasive COVID restrictions, et cetera, among the broader public. But I actually think what we've seen happen over the course of the past year is that a shocking amount of the public is comfortable, if not hungry, for more government sort of control into their private lives, et cetera, et cetera. And so I don't know about the fencing. I think we were talking about this as we were walking along the fencing. You were saying, I think it'll partially stay up, but the lawmakers themselves are really bugged by it because it makes their lives more difficult.
I think it's adorable to see all like the fiscal conservatives and libertarians saying, how much does this cost? And it's like, nobody in that building cares how much things cost. No. It's like, who cares? It could cost $1 billion a day, and they do it. But money doesn't mean anything to them.
That's another element of this. They estimated a $30 million budget for repairs to the Capitol building, which seems stunningly high to me. And it's just, I don't know.
So I was
want to
down
audit
there
this
for I was down there and I saw smashed windows and broken wooden barriers that were inside, like for guiding crowds.
They said some of the AV equipment was broken and stolen, which I believe.
Okay, that still doesn't come to $30 million. It must be for security add-ins.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean,
also
I know
everything costs money because they build that furniture in house.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. And so Tristan has a request in to kind of get to the bottom of it. But I want to talk about how this kind of is an illustration of Democratic priorities. And I think it is. I think they really want to continue talking about January 6th. I think they're going to continue.
Them and Liz Cheney.
Yeah. Well, and they're, I mean, one and the same in a sense, because they want to start focusing they want to make January 6th an emblem of the Republican Party. And you've seen them obviously pursue that with Senator Josh Hawley. But that's why...
I don't know why they wouldn't try to do that, because for years and years and years, they have been pretending that any day now there's going to be a big, horrible redneck riot. I mean, if you looked at the cover of The Week magazine the week before the election, when everyone was predicting a Hillary Clinton landslide, this is 2016 now, it had a bunch of angry MAGA-wearing guys with pitchforks and torches parading through the streets, and it said, look at like what chaos we're in for when Hillary Clinton wins the election.
Right.
Well, it turned out instead we were in for 9 months of nonstop, or 4 years of nonstop rioting from the left. Mm-hmm. And they never got that kind of cover treatment. But since we're sitting here at the Young America's Foundation right now, recording this, Young Americans for Freedom, it reminds me, what we're watching right now is like the same thing that we see in the 60s. So if you grow up today and you're watching the old documentaries and you're watching VH1, you're watching the whatever, you think the 1960s, I guess that's an old station, it's probably gone. I used to watch that when I was growing up.
Yeah, you're old.
I'm old. I used to get Netflix discs, and those were new.
That's embarrassing. You should stop embarrassing yourself.
I won't. I thought that the 1960s was all peace and love and flowers, and Woodstock was great. And it was like, it took me until I was a little older to realize that Woodstock was a disgusting bunch of naked people rolling in their own feces, and that the 60s were a bunch of terrorists and bombings, and that there was a wildly interesting tradition of conservative resistance on campuses at Young Americans for Freedom. But that history isn't told anymore because all the aged out hippies make the documentaries, and we're witnessing that in real time right now. Like that program you watched where it's like, look at this horrible treatment of these peaceful people at the White House who were tearing down statues, attacking police officers, and occupying a park and threatening the president, versus look at these horrible people. They're both horrible. But we're witnessing this propaganda in real time, and it shows you their priority, to your earlier question, is put this around the necks of the GOP. Show everyone that they are an evil, racist army that we need to have like a union forces here defending against. And meanwhile, let's skip over COVID aid and let's see if we can remake gender. I mean, it's not exactly the moderate that a lot of the Democratic primary voters went for with Joe Biden, is it?
No, but they're also fighting the culture war, right? Like this is, and obviously, I mean, I say this time and again, but like Republicans are always on defense in the culture war. Obviously, some Republicans use this as, like, they know it's politically expedient to get into the culture war, but every Republican culture war conversation is a response to something that Democrats are doing. Like, why are a bunch of Republicans now talking about transgenderism? Because the Democrats are trying to pass the Equality Act, which I think is the most radical piece of cultural legislation that stands a chance in my lifetime. I can't think of anything much more radical than the Equality Act.
There are no more boys. There are no more girls. You are whatever you want, and everyone in your parish halls are now open to be for Transgender Story Hour. And it's unreal what they're trying to put the country through right now. And you know what? This has actually been surprising me. If you haven't followed the Equality Act, there's some good articles at the Federalist about it right now, and it's dangerous. It's coming in front of the House and it's going to go to the Senate. But generally, the corporate media hasn't come across a Democratic priority, especially on transgender and gay stuff, that they haven't been willing to rush and attack on. No. And they've been largely silent on the Equality Act.
You think so? I was watching MSNBC last night and it was unbelievable. Was like,
it good?
The chyron was Biden leads on civil rights.
That's so disgusting. I just noticing, just watching reading Playbook and reading the morning newsletters, that yesterday was the first mention in a year of the Equality Act whatsoever, and it was just Equality Act's coming up for a vote. look how horrible Marjorie Taylor Greene is for opposing it. That's it.
Yes, but they went wall to wall with the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing because I think it was the easiest way for them to talk about the Equality Act.
Because why would we talk about remaking the entirety of American society and attacking Christianity when we can talk about QAnon, which no one's ever heard of?
Well, or when they can brand it, if they can brand the Equality Act as a Marjorie Taylor Greene, like stopping the Equality Act as a Marjorie Taylor Greene priority, it's better for them, and they know that, and it's a much easier way to talk about the Equality Act than women's sports. And I mean, it is,
True.
and that's again, like I think the other MSNBC chyron was Congress bans, I think, LGBT discrimination, I think is what it said. And it's just like, that's one way to frame it. But it was the lead of Ari Melber's show yesterday. So, I mean, I think the media is on top of it, but it's interesting you mentioned Playbook, because I do think there's this mentality in sort of establishment circles, so the establishment legacy media and the political establishment in Washington, D.C., that they don't like getting their hands dirty with some of these like culture war issues sometimes, even though they fully agree with the Democratic agenda. They just feel like to talk about cultural issues, that like that's a crazy, like we're not going to talk about transgenderism. Of course there are transgender rights, but like we don't want to get into that.
And I was wondering if it came from Pelosi's office, because Nancy Pelosi has a very big influence on what's printed in Playbook, or at least her office does. They have for years and years and years. And I was wondering if she was just saying, this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time.
That's interesting.
I mean, if Chuck Schumer is sitting there, he's got a bunch of senators. I mean, the Republicans, even the Mitt Romneys, are generally going to be opposed to this kind of thing. But if you see some of the Democratic senators who are more vulnerable saying, "Hold on a second, we're not going to make it so that it's illegal to say a boy is a boy," that's insane.
I hope so. I've just like lost all optimism that we have people willing, like that's a very courageous thing to do, and it shouldn't be, but it actually is, because it involves you risking the certain outcome of being smeared as a bigot, and not just by the crazy libs anymore, like it used to be like Code Pink, but now it's the entire corporate media and political establishment that you will take those charges from. So, but I have actually been really optimistic what I've seen from the GOP in the last few days as the Equality Act has sort of surfaced to the top of political discourse.
Rand Paul.
Well, yeah.
Senator Rand Paul was like, he was way out there, and people called him a horrific bigot because he said that using deeply invasive surgical procedures to remove your sexual organs is genital mutilation. Sorry to use that word. The
organ?
That's obvious what it is. I mean,
yeah.
And people said, "Oh my gosh, this is beyond the pale." And it's like, hey, really? I thought that doing that to a 15-year-old was beyond the pale. I guess saying it out loud, that's beyond the pale.
Is it Collins or Murkowski that said the act goes too far? That it wasn't one of them. I didn't catch that. I think it was Collins. And that's sort of where I was. I mean, I've been very nervous about the Equality Act post November, because
since the 70s.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. But because Collins, Murkowski, I didn't know what Joe Manchin would do with this. I didn't know what somebody like Mitt Romney, who marched with Black Lives Matter protesters, would do with this. And I didn't know what some other, like if you think about a Rob Portman, if Democrats were able to sort of advertise this better, but it's actually just such a bad piece of legislation that they're struggling to do that.
Yeah, and the Republicans actually kind of have this easy. What the Democratic bill would do is take what New York's done and Massachusetts and California and shut down Christian adoption agencies, for example. These are the Christian religion is what invented adoption agencies, but they're going to shut them down, and the rationale for that is to create more homes where children can go. That doesn't make sense whatsoever. They're going to take the Colorado baker suit that we saw with a Masterpiece Cake Shop, and they're going to nationalize that. Now, that man, it took him 7 years to win a Supreme Court lawsuit, a very narrow victory, and he's still, almost 5 years later, tied up in legislation because he's been sued since by transgender activists, by a Satanist, which is insane, and he's still tied up in Colorado lawsuit. And they say, we want that model to be the national model. They're going to say that women, like colleges and high schools and junior highs and grade schools, have to accept men playing in women's sports and in the locker rooms and in the gymnasiums, everywhere, in the private spaces that women have that they fought for a very long time. These are just the beginnings, and all of these things are going to be called discrimination. It says in the opening paragraphs of the act that the traditional belief that men and women, what marriage is between a man and a woman, is an example of discrimination.
Yeah, no, 100%. The act, it goes further than what happened to Jack Phillips, which is completely upsetting and anti-American. It's still happening to Jack Phillips, but it will have ramifications for the way that you speak. And there's a potential of consequences just based on the way that you address, men and women, based on your religion. But really, I mean, it's a really terrible piece of legislation. But the reason that I was genuinely very apprehensive about how Congress would handle it, I wrote about this today in the Federalist. Someone sent it to me and brought it to my attention. The Human Rights Campaign, which is one of the most powerful advocacy groups, democratic advocacy groups here in Washington, put out a list of more than 300 businesses that have joined their coalition in favor of the Equality Act. And it is all of the big companies. I mean, it's Amazon, Best Buy, Bain Capital. It's a crazy list of companies.
That's a list of all of my least favorite companies.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is. Like 3M is on it. It's just the most, but it's pretty. I
like M&M.
Right, M&M. M and M's. Right. But anyway, so this is, and the Human Rights Campaign is boasting on its website that it's like $6 trillion. Like this group together represents $6 trillion in revenue and 13 million employees. And it's like you are literally bragging about how corporate power, like how big the corporate stick you're wielding is. It's nuts. But that's why I genuinely was concerned about how centrists in Congress might handle this bill, because centrists in the business world, people who believe themselves to be centrists, whose political party is green, are now cultural radicals because they have been intimidated into that. The boomers have been intimidated into that by that sort of progressive or bigot binary that their millennial staffers force on them. Then the millennials who are in those top positions now obviously believe in all of that. So the pressure for this terrible piece of legislation, I mean, Taylor Swift passed the Equality Act thing at the end of one of her music videos a couple of years ago.
Remember when she was normal?
Yeah.
It was a while ago.
I know. It was an act.
Was it all an act?
It was all an act. I'm sorry to break that to you. I know how much you love Taylor Swift.
I don't know what she sounds like.
Okay. Well, I was going to do an impression, but thought better. Anyway, so the pressure to pass this terrible radical piece of legislation is enormous. And so to see, Rand Paul, who I think would be good on this issue no matter what, but to see somebody like Rand Paul, or to see even somebody like Susan Collins not getting, totally behind it, that's heartening.
Now, I don't remember the Democrats running on this. I thought it was a return to normalcy. And it was an end to the pandemic, with shutting down the pandemic, but not shutting down the country. And it was a return to decency. And instead, we've seen the occupation of Washington for now 7 weeks. We've seen the Equality Act and this attempt to entirely remake American society and push Christians into the same wing as the Ku Klux Klan, all Christians.
But that's what the Southern Poverty Law Center has been doing literally for years. It's just now mainstream.
It's almost like they lied in the campaign trail. I feel like they might have lied in the campaign trail.
It's hard to believe. Not them.
I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen people lie in the campaign trail before.
What did you think about what happened in Syria last night?
We've seen already a return to a war footing in the Middle East.
Return to normal.
A return to normalcy.
The real return to normalcy is going to be on Biden's foreign policy.
And I guess it reminds me of the days when people used to cheer when they heard that an Iranian-backed militia in Syria had been hit with a U.S. airstrike. Why? Because they were bad guys? I mean, this is insane. This is a return to normalcy across the board for the Democrats. It's a return to the Barack Obama administration. It's a return to wars that we'd begun to finally extricate ourselves to. I mean, it's depressing to see that back in the headlines, and already troops returning to Iraq. We've been fighting there for 20 years. It's got to end.
Why do you think the foreign policy establishment has been able to sort of just snap right back into place so easily?
Because they never left.
Well, I mean, Trump, if he did disrupt the swamp in one sense, it really was on foreign policy. It wasn't really on lobbying. It wasn't on healthcare.
People stayed.
Did they though?
Yeah, in the Pentagon. It's the generals and the hawkish Republicans. Remember Mitch McConnell said he was going to stand up against Afghanistan withdrawal.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to fight Donald Trump all the way on that. Donald Trump was very severely outnumbered by people. And we saw that in the Pentagon when he was there, that they would lie to him repeatedly. And we had the former ambassador, when he was leaving the Middle East, say, oh yeah, we just lied about having troops in Syria.
Yeah.
That's the level of viciousness with which they're willing to pursue their completely failed policies. And now who's in charge? A senile man who plays Mario Kart with his granddaughter, which, by the way, is adorable if you're not president, Mike. You should do that. He should be doing that full time.
Yeah.
And Kamala Harris, who's a lightweight who came in third in her own state. I mean, who's going to tell the Pentagon what to do?
Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I guess, right?
Or Luigi.
Yeah. Here's your first order, generals. Boys or girls, okay? Got that? Bomb whatever you want.
Do you have to pick a pronoun in Mario Kart?
Not since the last time I played.
So that's vicious, really. The president himself is engaging in a bigoted video game.
Peach is androgynous.
Okay.
They're not. Yeah, that's the little mushroom guy, right?
I mean, I don't know. It's been a long time.
I forgot.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not president. I don't have time for Mario Kart.
I have no idea what Yoshi is. That's a dinosaur.
I don't know. Back to Syria. Yeah. So, do you think that let's talk about the swamp for a second,
Just
which is
the return
now
to normalcy.
Well, the return, I don't know, because there is a return to normalcy in the sense that the machinery of Washington has gotten lubricated again and is operating as usual. But at the same time, there's not normalcy in the country because we're all locked up. And on top of that, there's not normalcy because we're already
it's a new normal. It's a new normal. It's a fake normal.
But there's an old normal in Washington that's sort of bifurcated, right? Like on the one level, Washington it's back to its old normal, but on the other hand, the public is in a new normal. That sounds like we sound stoned.
I think we should cut this part of the podcast out.
Nope. Chris always asks me to do that, and I just never do.
Oh, please.
So, in the sense that all of this is an illustration of the Democratic Party's priorities, which are Equality Act and painting Republicans as the party of the January 6th riot. How do you think that helps them or hurts them going forward? They're going to face, an election cycle in 2 years, just like Republicans will. The Biden administration is proceeding sort of as everybody would expect it to, in that it's very even-keeled aesthetically and sort of tonally very even-keeled. But what do you think, what do you think? Do you think there will be a political efficacy to that messaging on the Democrats'
And they're
part?
even keeled in their messaging because the press has gone back to being even keeled.
100%. There's a quote in the Rolling Stone has a glowing new profile of Yamiche Alcindor out. Yes, a new profile where she says, I hope the lesson of the Trump I hope something that sticks around after the Trump administration is, you can't just take what the president says as reality. You can't just take what the police say as reality. And it's like, you did not need Donald Trump to show you that. You're a reporter. You should have a mentality that you're covering people without fear or favor, and you hate the corrupt, sick politicians in Washington, D.C. They're all liars. You should have come with that mentality no matter what. The fact that you needed Donald Trump to show you that is remarkable.
The amount of arguments I got in with Trump spokesmen who are like, off the record, we're accomplishing this. And I'm like, I'm going to need some proof of that.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to come see that. And they'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And it's like, no, I need to come see that. Now, that's not uncommon. You see that with the Biden administration. You saw that with the Obama administration. You saw that with the Trump administration. That's what spokesmen do. But the idea that a reporter wouldn't call them out on it and say, hold on a second. It's completely insane. I mean, we're past the days of Jim Acosta and Caitlin Collins screaming during a children's Easter egg roll about Benghazi, or not Benghazi, Russia or Flynn or
you
whatever
were the
else.
one screaming about Benghazi.
What about Benghazi? So I actually think this is interesting. The Democrats here have a really good opportunity using the footage of January 6th, those Capitol riots, whatever. We don't have to give them a date. And the footage of these riots to show how radical they could say that the party of Donald Trump is and the GOP is. That's something they could really run with. And they could have a very successful 8 years to 12 years in governance if they were to take that to a liberal, centrist, even Barack Obama era level. And Obama was a very big leftist, but compared to what they're doing now, I think that things like the Equality Act actually do threaten to cause a big whiplash for them in the primaries.
Absolutely, I think so, because what they're doing, again, I wrote about this today, is that it's disempowering the working class. The working class hates cancel culture. The Equality Act is like actually just fuel on the cancel culture fire, which was already raging, and the working class hates cancel culture because it disempowers them. You can't speak up at a PTA meeting. You can't speak up to your HR department when they're shoving critical race theory nonsense down your throat. And that's for workers sort of across the spectrum. It doesn't matter if you're upper middle class, wherever you are, you're getting that weird stuff from your human resources department. There's no point in you speaking out against it. There's no point in you speaking out against it because, you'll
be fired.
You'll be fired.
I've talked to people at some of these major corporations, including some of the ones that you listed as sponsors, who are high up in those companies, who said if they posted on their Facebook wall, "I stand with the blue," or something like that, they might lose their jobs.
Yeah. And so
fired by people in their mid-20s in the human resources department with their boss's hands tied. And these guys are senior.
Right. And so imagine you're somebody in, where I'm from, Wisconsin, who is at a PTA meeting, and the public school is great state. The public school is reading I Am Jazz to first graders, which is a book about a transgender child.
I kind of guessed that. I was like, what is that book? Yeah. I don't remember that from growing up, but it sounds... It's not about jazz, is it?
No.
The music.
It's not. That's La La Land, you're thinking. But no, but there's no point in you speaking out at that PTA meeting. And if you do speak out for what you think is right at that PTA meeting, the consequences you're going to face are going to make it hard for your family. And that's obvious. And so when people in Washington talk about cancel culture not being real, it's their stupid privilege bubble that makes them not think about that.
Until one of their friends gets canceled?
Yeah.
And they're like, why don't you stop this?
Sign the Harper's letter.
Why don't the Republicans help me?
Give me the Harper's letter. I must sign it.
Yeah, feeble wrist shake.
No, so I think, I don't think the Equality Act is great for Democrats. But on the other hand, I'm curious what you think about the January 6th messaging. How you think trying to paint the Republicans as the party of January 6th, trying to paint the Republicans as a bunch of sort of like, roving bands of MAGA mobs empowered by Josh Hawley. How is that going to work for Democrats?
I mean, the thing is, I think it's extremely effective. I think that those riots were stupid and should never have happened, and that the people, even for those folks who are listening right now, who sympathize with the anger and may even sympathize with what they did, they handed a noose to the hangman.
Yes.
And they said, here it is. Here's everything you need on camera to destroy everything that I came here and fought for. Now, I understand that there was a lot of frustration down there. There was a lot of anger. And I understand that a lot of these people were the forgotten people.
Have been screwed by the system.
It was a forgotten class of America. Yeah. It was people who were in a very low income bracket, people who were really struggling to pay the bills, people who people in Washington, D.C. don't care about. I understand that anger, but what they did is they took all their legitimate views and they had them delegitimized through acts of political violence, which are unacceptable in our society. And that gave the Democratic Party an unbelievable amount of power over the right. And now we're starting to see an interesting backlash because some Republicans have been trying to use this to exercise the party of Donald Trump. Mitch McConnell tried, and he's been slapped hard enough in the jack to step back and say, hold on a second. Now Liz Cheney is pushing this. And people like Kevin McCarthy, who kept her on tactically, I think, and didn't go against her on his leadership team, are now really regretting it because she's embarrassing them in public. And when they go down to hold a conversation or a press conference about one of their initiatives, Liz Cheney will spout off on Donald Trump. I mean, that's feeding right into the Democratic and the corporate media trope about this riot, and it needs to be taken out. Congressman Roy Blunt was out there the next day. Not Roy Blunt, excuse me. Was out there the next day attacking Liz Cheney with a bunch of conservative members of Congress, saying she needs to go. She's disqualified herself. She needs to be fired. That's going to be step one for the GOP is get rid of your membership that's saying this is the fault of the Republican Party and the fault of their voters, and that this is a racist party. That's insane.
But the media is elevating those voices right now.
Congressman Chip Roy, excuse me.
They're amplifying those voices intentionally.
Yeah, they're amplifying it, and Republicans are playing into it. It reminds me of in 2016 when Donald Trump was running for president. Mitch McConnell wasn't really on the side of Donald Trump. He never was. But he didn't do press conferences because he's not an idiot. So he would just avoid the press, and his staff would threaten the press. If you follow the majority leader and you attack him with microphones, you will be cut off from any access to this office for the rest of your life. Meanwhile, asshat Paul Ryan was like walking around like a child, walking into press conferences everywhere he went, having to condemn Donald Trump every day and doing it again and again with like tears coming down his eyes. What a weak man. That's kind of what some of the Republicans are doing now. Meanwhile, these guys like Mitch McConnell, they can disappear when they want to. They can cut you off from their power right away. And you don't have to be the Paul Ryan. Don't be Paul Ryan.
I don't know. I mean, it's tough. I think Republicans are the fact that the media sort of amplification of these voices is able to be a really serious wedge, I think just speaks to the fact that Republicans don't have a firm grasp on what the post-Trump presidency Republican Party should be and is. Like they don't totally
have a fight right now.
But they don't have a grasp for what the party is, not just the politicians. The party is the voters. And I don't think they have a firm grasp on what the voters want, who the voters are.
Isn't that funny?
Because the
voters have been clamoring for this, and guys like Rick Santorum have been saying this for years, that this is what the voters wanted. They wanted a conservative populist nationalism, a working class party. And Republicans just ignored them.
Right.
And after 4 years of it being shoved down their throats and then Donald Trump leaving, they're like, are you sure that's what they wanted?
Yeah.
They don't want to just go to war in Syria anymore?
Yeah.
They don't just want to cut corporate tax rates? Can't we go back to that? That was easy.
Well, and
Meanwhile, still being called violent racists, horrible people by the Democrats, no matter what they did. But I do think that this is the press's chance, and they've been seizing it, to take up all those useful idiots, Jonah Goldberg, Bill Kristol's, who've been around,
Chris Bedfords,
who have all been like fired or put by the wayside nowadays with their Never Trump stuff. The Lincoln Project, which has since been like, now they're going to get some real scrutiny. All these people have been pushed aside. They always overrepresented them. They were like 0.1% of the Republican Party, but they would say Civil War every day. And now they're doing the same thing. There's like Liz Cheney and other Mitch McConnell, who was on that side.
But the problem
is, saying Civil War. I kind of think that a lot of the Republican Party is not at the leadership level, but at the base level is kind of. So I'm surprised at how well populism is doing since Trump's left office.
But do you think that Liz Cheney is representative of the suburban, educated college woman demographic that Republicans genuinely suffered for losing in the course of the Trump era?
I'm not sure about that.
But that's, I think, the point, right? Nobody is really sure. And like to bring it full circle, Mitch McConnell
I don't think you need all the policies of Cheney and Bush, though, to get those women back. You just need to not use mean words.
Right.
Kevin McCarthy could do.
Yeah.
I don't think Kevin McCarthy is the next Donald Trump or anything like that, but Kevin McCarthy could push Trump's policies and not alienate those women because he wouldn't go on there and talk to Mika about how she was bleeding from her face. Like, he just wouldn't. He's got a different media tactic than Donald Trump does.
The art of the Donald. We have the author right here.
I will be the greatest president God ever created.
Yeah. No, I think we've actually landed at a really good ending point because it's true that the Republican Party is in, for all of the talk about this for years, like every party at every given moment is in an identity crisis, frankly, because there's always competing demographics and there's always, the shifting sands of time mixing together with those competing demographics. But the Republican Party, wasn't it?
That was beautiful.
I think I'm going to knit that on a throw pillow and give it to you.
Thank you.
I can't knit. I think maybe Madeline can. Anyway, the point is, I really do think that it's not so much the general identity crisis. It's really specifically they don't know what to do with Trumpism. And if they knew what the voters wanted, they would know exactly what to do with Trumpism.
They do know what the voters want. I don't think they just really don't want to do it. But it's so hard. Abortion is hard. Borders are hard. Culture war is hard.
Yeah, I don't know.
Math is easy.
We'll see.
Spending is easy. Go back to normal. War is over there. Rah, rah.
Oh, boy. Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky. He's Chris Bedford. We'll be back soon with more. Go ahead, Chris. You looked like you wanted to say something.
I was just thinking about how my mood actually improved during this dismal conversation.
Oh, that's weird. That's sick,
but it's great to be with you, Emily.
Well, we'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.